Whispers echoed across crystal glasses. Cruel laughter targeted a plus-size woman near velvet curtains. Someone muttered an unforgivable insult. Suddenly, heavy double doors slammed shut. Locks clicked. A ruthless billionaire stepped forward, eyes burning with lethal fury, promising absolute hell for everyone who dared mock his secret obsession. Beatrice Caldwell adjusted the bodice of her deep emerald gown, feeling the heavy silk cling to her thick thighs and broad hips. She was undeniably fat, a physical reality she had long accepted, and learned to dress with elegance, but standing in the opulent grand ballroom of the Harrington estate in Long Island, that acceptance felt incredibly fragile. She was an independent art appraiser, highly respected at Sotheby's and trusted by elite private collectors. Tonight she was only present because Richard Harrington insisted the woman who authenticated his newly acquired $60 million Caravaggio attend his charity gala as a guest of honor. She felt completely alien among the sea of razor-thin socialites and hedge fund heirs. Surrounding her were women with sharp collarbones and hollowed cheeks, clad in minimalist designer slips that looked like spun glass. Beatrice, with her soft chin, full stomach, and thick arms, stood out like a plush velvet cushion in a room full of jagged diamonds. Across the room, standing near a towering ice sculpture, Chloe Harrington swirled champagne in a baccarat flute. Chloe was Richard's daughter, a woman whose entire existence seemed fueled by generational wealth and petty cruelties. Beside her stood Bradley Wentworth, a junior partner at a ruthless Manhattan law firm known for aggressive corporate takeovers. Did she misunderstand the invitation? Chloe's voice carried over the soft jazz playing from the live string quartet. She made zero effort to lower her volume. I thought this was a black tie gala, not a casting call for a bakery commercial. A chorus of snickers erupted from their immediate circle. Beatrice stiffened her fingers, tightening around her clutch. She fixed her gaze on a Renaissance tapestry hanging on the far wall, desperately trying to map its thread count in her mind, to block out the rising humiliation. "Look at those arms," Bradley chimed in a cruel smirk, twisting his handsome face. "I'm genuinely surprised the seamstress didn't run out of fabric. I mean, how much silk does it take to cover that much surface area?" "Careful, Brad," another woman giggled. "Don't get too close. She looks hungry. She might mistake your Rolex for an hors d'oeuvre." Beatrice's cheeks burned with a deep, furious red. She had dealt with microaggressions her entire life, the sideways glances at restaurants, the unasked-for diet advice from distant relatives. But this was a blatant public execution of her dignity. She considered turning around and walking out the grand oak doors, leaving the Harringtons and their wretched high society friends behind. But Beatrice was stubborn. She had earned her place in this room through sheer intellect and an unrivaled eye for Renaissance art. She refused to be chased out by overgrown high school bullies. Unbeknownst to the laughing socialites, the shadows of the mezzanine above held a silent, terrifying observer. Victor Castellano stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the brass railing. He was the undisputed head of the Castellano syndicate, a man whose legitimate front as a global shipping magnate barely concealed an underworld empire of blood iron and absolute control. Victor did not attend society galas for charity. He attended them to remind old money who actually owned the city. And right now his cold slate-grey eyes were locked entirely on Beatrice Caldwell. Victor's obsession with Beatrice had begun 6 months prior. She had been hired to appraise a collection of seized assets for a shell corporation tied to his family. During a tense meeting, one of his most violent lieutenants had tried to intimidate her into inflating a painting's value. Beatrice, clutching her clipboard against her full chest, had firmly refused staring down a known killer and lecturing him on the integrity of brush strokes. Victor had watched the security footage of that interaction dozens of times. He was captivated by her brilliance, her refusal to break, and her lush, unapologetic curves. To a man who lived in a world of manufactured perfection and deceit, Beatrice was the most vibrant, substantial, and real woman he had ever seen. He had pulled strings to ensure she received the invitation, tonight intending to finally approach her properly. Down on the floor, the situation rapidly deteriorated. Beatrice, deciding she needed a moment to breathe, moved toward the exit. Her path unfortunately intersected with Chloe's group. As Beatrice passed, Chloe intentionally shifted her weight, thrusting her sharp elbow directly into Beatrice's side. The movement was calculated. The full glass of dark Pinot Noir in Chloe's hand tipped, splashing its crimson contents directly across the front of Beatrice's emerald silk gown. The cold liquid soaked instantly through the expensive fabric, staining it, with a dark, ugly patch that clung to her stomach and thighs. Beatrice gasped, instinctively stepping back. "Oh my God! Watch where you're rolling!" Chloe shrieked, faking outrage. "You clumsy fat cow! You almost ruined my Prada heels!" The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence in the ballroom was deafening. 200 guests turned to stare. I didn't," Beatrice stammered, looking down at her ruined dress, the humiliation finally breaking through her stoic exterior. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "Just leave," Bradley sneered, stepping up beside Chloe. "You clearly don't belong here. You're making everyone uncomfortable. Go back to whatever buffet you crawled out of." Laughter echoed. It wasn't just Chloe's group anymore. It was a ripple of cruel amusement spreading through the elite crowd. Beatrice felt her chest tighten, a panic attack, threatening to swallow her whole. She looked toward the heavy double doors, ready to flee. Up on the mezzanine, a custom-tailored suit jacket was quietly unbuttoned. A heavy, silenced firearm bumped against a tailored waistline. Victor Castellano had seen enough. A sharp, piercing whistle cut through the cruel laughter. It was a tactical command, sharp and military grade. Instantly, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. 12 men dressed as catering staff dropped their silver trays. 8 men in tuxedos who had been blending in with the security detail moved with terrifying synchronization. Slam! The massive 15-foot mahogany double doors of the ballroom swung shut with the force of a gunshot. The heavy steel deadbolts installed for elite security engaged with a synchronized heavy clack. The laughter died in the throats of the socialites. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Richard Harrington, the host, stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "What is the meaning of this guards open? Those doors immediately." None of the guards moved. They stood rigid, their hands resting ominously inside their tuxedo jackets. Slowly, the rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the grand marble staircase. Every eye turned upward. Victor Castellano descended the stairs. He moved with the lethal, unhurried grace of an apex predator. He wore a midnight black bespoke suit, a stark contrast to his pale, sharp features and dark, slicked-back hair. There was no warmth in his expression, only a chilling, absolute authority. Whispers entirely different from the ones mocking Beatrice hissed through the crowd. "Is that Castellano? Dear God, what is he doing here? Don't look at him. Look away." Victor ignored the sea of terrified billionaires and politicians. His eyes were locked solely on the trembling woman in the ruined emerald dress. The crowd naturally parted for him, stepping back as if he radiated heat. He stopped directly in front of Beatrice. Up close, he was towering easily, 6'3", broad-shouldered, and radiating a scent of expensive cedar and cordite. Beatrice looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected him to demand something, to scold her, or perhaps to mock her like the rest. Instead, Victor's hard features softened by a fraction of a millimeter. He shrugged off his midnight black jacket, revealing a tailored gun holster strapped over his crisp white shirt. A collective gasp swept through the room at the sight of the weapon. Ignoring the reaction, Victor gently draped his warm, heavy jacket over Beatrice's shoulders, pulling the lapels together to hide the wine stain on her chest. The silk lining smelled intoxicating. "You are cold, mia regina." Victor murmured his voice, a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down Beatrice's spine. It was the first time she had heard him speak. Beatrice swallowed hard, clutching the edges of his jacket. "Who are you?" "A man who is deeply offended by the lack of manners in this room," Victor replied softly. He gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Then Victor pivoted. The softness vanished, replaced by an aura of pure, unadulterated violence. He fixed his gaze on Chloe Harrington and Bradley Wentworth. "Nobody leaves," Victor's voice boomed, echoing off the frescoed ceiling. "Not until I have extracted a pound of flesh for every ounce of disrespect shown to this woman tonight." Richard Harrington nervously pushed his way to the front, sweating profusely. "Mr. Castellano." "Victor, please. This is a misunderstanding. These are just kids. They were just joking around." Victor didn't even look at Richard. He merely snapped his fingers. Two massive men in suits stepped forward, grabbing Richard by the arms and forcing the billionaire to his knees on the marble floor. Chloe screamed, dropping her empty champagne glass. It shattered the sound sharp in the dead silence of the room. Bradley took a step back, his arrogant smirk entirely gone, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of sheer terror. "Joking around," Victor repeated, tasting the words as if they were ash. He took slow, measured steps toward Chloe. "Tell me, Miss Harrington, do you find your family's debt amusing? Because according to the ledgers of my private Swiss bank accounts at Julius Baer, your father owes my associates roughly $42 million, a debt he secured using this very estate as collateral." Chloe's eyes widened in horror. She looked at her father, who was weeping silently on the floor. I didn't know," Chloe stammered, trembling violently. "Ignorance is a disease of the privileged," Victor stated coldly. "You mock her size. You mock her space in this world. You, a parasite living off borrowed money and stolen time, dared to lay your hands on a woman whose intellect and worth you couldn't match in 10 lifetimes. He turned to Bradley, who was attempting to slowly edge backward into the crowd. "Hold him," Victor commanded softly. Two guards grabbed Bradley, dragging him forward. Victor stepped into Bradley's personal space. He reached out, grabbing the collar of Bradley's expensive shirt, twisting it until the lawyer gasped for air. "Bradley Wentworth," Victor said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You like to comment on people's appetites. Shall we discuss yours? Shall we discuss the offshore accounts you've been using to embezzle funds from your own firm's pension clients, or perhaps the illegal gambling debts you owe the triads in Macau?" Bradley sobbed a pathetic, broken sound. Please don't. They'll kill me." "I am currently deciding if I will let them have the honor or if I will handle you myself," Victor replied, throwing Bradley to the ground in disgust. Victor slowly walked back to Beatrice, who was watching the scene in absolute shock. The men who had tormented her, the untouchable elites who ruled this social sphere, were broken and weeping on the floor within 3 minutes of this man's arrival. He stood beside her, wrapping a protective arm around her thick waist, pulling her soft body flush against his hard side. He looked out over the terrified crowd of hostages. This woman, Victor announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality, is Beatrice Caldwell, and from this second forward, she is under the direct protection of the Castellano family. Anyone who looks at her sideways, Anyone who whispers her name in anything less than total reverence will find out exactly why the police do not enter my neighborhoods." He looked down at Chloe, who was sobbing into her hands. "Get on your knees," Victor ordered. "Both of you, crawl to her and apologize." Trembling knees scraped against the cold, polished marble floor. Chloe Harrington, heir to a massive real estate fortune, and Bradley Wentworth, the arrogant corporate shark, lowered themselves in front of 200 terrified witnesses. Their descent was agonizingly slow, a public shattering of their untouchable egos. "Move," Victor commanded the single syllable, slicing through the heavy silence like a guillotine. Chloe choked on a sob, her perfectly manicured hands slipping on the smooth stone as she dragged herself forward. Her designer slip dress bunched at her knees, and her expensive mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, ugly rivers. Beside her, Bradley whimpered his face, a mask of absolute defeat. They crawled over the spilled Pinot Noir, the dark red wine staining their own clothes, a poetic reversal of the humiliation they had just inflicted upon Beatrice. When they finally reached the hem of Beatrice's ruined emerald gown, they stopped bowing their heads. "Look at her," Victor snapped. "Look into the eyes of your better." Slowly, Chloe looked up, her expression a pathetic mix of fear and desperation. I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Beatrice. I shouldn't have done it. Please, apologize for calling her fat." Victor corrected his hand, resting reassuringly on Beatrice's lower back, his thumb tracing the curve of her hip. "Apologize for acting as if her size diminishes her immense worth. Apologize for being an empty, cruel shell of a human being." "I'm sorry," Chloe cried, tears freely falling. "I'm sorry for what I said about your body. You are beautiful. I was jealous. I'm sorry." Bradley rushed to add his own pathetic pleas. "Forgive me, Miss Caldwell. I am a fool. A disgusting, arrogant fool. It won't ever happen again, I swear to God." Beatrice stared down at them. For 32 years, she had navigated a world that constantly told her she took up too much space. She had weathered diet culture, backhanded compliments, and the subtle exclusions of high society, but standing here, enveloped in the intoxicating scent of Victor's cologne and the absolute safety of his presence, the lifelong weight of other people's judgments simply evaporated. She did not feel pity for them, but she also realized she had no desire to match their cruelty. "Your apologies mean nothing to me," Beatrice said, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing clearly across the dead, silent ballroom. "Because you aren't sorry for what you did. You are only sorry that there are finally consequences for it. Keep your hollow words." She looked up at Victor. His dark eyes were filled with a burning, ravenous pride. "I want to leave," she told him softly. "I don't want to breathe the same air as them anymore." Victor nodded once. He raised his hand, signaling his men. "Arthur," he called out. A broad-shouldered man in a sharp grey suit stepped from the shadows. "Yes, boss." "Execute the seizure protocols," Victor ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "The Harrington estate is officially ours. Transfer the deeds to the holding company in Zurich, empty the bank accounts, and secure the Caravaggio in the West Wing. As for Wentworth, forward his gambling ledgers to the Macau Syndicate and send the embezzlement files to the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington." Richard Harrington wailed from the floor, clutching his chest. "No, Victor, you can't. You're ruining us." "You ruined yourselves," Victor replied coldly. He wrapped his arm securely around Beatrice's waist, guiding her away from the kneeling elites. "And Arthur, keep the doors locked for another hour. Let them sit in the dark and think about their manners." Rain began to lash against the tinted bulletproof windows of the Maybach Pullman, as it glided smoothly up the private winding roads of Alpine, New Jersey. The chaotic nightmare of the Harrington Gala felt 1,000,000 miles away, replaced by the hushed, luxurious silence of the luxury vehicle's rear cabin. Beatrice sat nervously on the cream leather seats, Victor's heavy jacket still draped over her shoulders. Beside her, Victor poured a measure of aged Macallan, 25, into 2 crystal tumblers, offering her one. "Drink," he urged gently. "It will calm your nerves." Beatrice took the glass, her fingers brushing his. His skin was scorching hot. She took a small sip, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down her throat. "Why did you do all of this?" she finally asked, turning to face him. "You didn't just stumble into that party. You were waiting, and you knew exactly who I was." Victor leaned back, swirling the whiskey in his glass. He studied her, his gaze wandering from the soft line of her jaw down to the generous swell of her chest and the thick, beautiful curve of her thighs pressing against the leather. He didn't hide his hunger, nor did he make her feel objectified. It was a gaze of profound, respectful worship. "Do you remember the appraisal you did 6 months ago? The seized assets for the shell company Vesper Holdings?" Victor asked. Beatrice frowned, searching her memory. "Yes. There was an Artemisia Gentileschi painting. The men guarding it were intimidating. One of them tried to force me to authenticate it as a primary original, but I proved it was a workshop copy due to the lapis lazuli application. That man you stood up to was my underboss," Victor said, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. "I watched the security footage of that interaction. I watched a woman with curves like a Renaissance goddess stare down a man who has killed for a living simply because she refused to compromise her professional integrity over a few brush strokes." Beatrice's breath hitched. "You're the head of the Castellano family." "I am," Victor confirmed. "And from the moment I saw you fiercely defending the truth in that warehouse, I was captivated. I live in a world built on lies. Beatrice. Fake smiles, fake loyalty, fake bodies carved by surgeons to fit a narrow, pathetic standard. But you are entirely real. Your mind is a steel trap, and your body—" He paused, his voice dropping an octave. "Your body is a masterpiece, lush, soft, and substantial. You are everything I have ever craved." A hot flush spread across Beatrice's cheeks, but for the first time in her life, it wasn't from shame. It was from pure, unadulterated desire. No man had ever spoken about her size with such reverence. No man had ever looked at her belly or her heavy arms and seen absolute perfection. The Maybach pulled through heavy wrought-iron gates, coming to a halt in front of a sprawling modern fortress made of glass, dark stone, and steel hidden deep within a private forest. This was Victor's sanctuary. As they walked inside, the grand foyer opened into a massive living space, decorated with priceless antiquities. But before Beatrice could fully take in her surroundings, Victor's phone rang. It was a secure, encrypted line. Victor answered his demeanor instantly, shifting back to the cold, calculating mob boss. "Speak." He listened for a moment, his jaw clenching. A dangerous storm brewed in his grey eyes. "Is that so secure, the perimeter?" "I will handle it." He hung up, turning to Beatrice with a heavy sigh. "It seems Richard Harrington is not as entirely broken as I presumed. In a desperate bid to save his estate, he has contacted the Russo Syndicate, my primary rivals in the city. Harrington promised them the $60 million Caravaggio we just seized, claiming I stole it from him in exchange for the Russos sending a hit squad to my port operations tonight." Beatrice gasped. "A mob war? Over the painting?" "Over pride," Victor corrected. The painting is just the currency. The Russos have the manpower to cause me significant financial damage if they strike the ports unannounced. I need to leave and command my men. I will have heavily armed guards stationed outside your door here. You are completely safe, Mia Regina." "Wait," Beatrice said, her brilliant mind suddenly racing. She stood up, ignoring the wine stain on her dress. "The Caravaggio, the one you just seized from Harrington's West Wing. Is it here? Did your men bring it to this house?" Victor looked confused. "Yes. Arthur's team secured it in the vault downstairs 10 minutes ago." "Why? Take me to it," Beatrice demanded, her eyes flashing with a sudden fierce determination. Now. The underground vault was a climate-controlled bunker lined with steel. In the center of the room, resting on an easel beneath stark, bright examination lights, sat the painting. It was supposedly Caravaggio's Nativity, with St. Francis and Saint Lawrence, a legendary piece that had vanished decades ago, only for Harrington to claim he had privately acquired it from a reclusive European collector. Beatrice didn't hesitate. She threw off Victor's heavy jacket, grabbed a magnifying loupe from a nearby desk and marched straight to the canvas. Victor watched in silent fascination as the woman he desired transformed into an absolute apex predator of the art world. She leaned over the painting, her soft stomach pressing against the edge of the easel, her eyes scanning the dark, dramatic chiaroscuro lighting that defined Caravaggio's style. "Harrington used this painting as collateral for his massive loans, correct?" Beatrice asked, not looking away from the canvas. "Yes," Victor replied. "Julius Baer and several of our own shell companies extended him nearly $40 million in credit based on the verified appraisal of this piece." "Verified by whom?" Beatrice asked, pulling a small UV light flashlight from her clutch, a tool she never left home without. "A man named Julian Vance," Victor answered, "a respected independent authenticator." "Julian Vance is a hack who takes bribes." Beatrice spat, clicking on the UV light and running it over the lower left quadrant of the painting. She moved closer, her nose almost touching the canvas. "Look here. Look at the yellow pigment in St. Lawrence's robes." Victor stepped closer, standing right behind her. He could feel the intoxicating warmth of her curves against his chest. "What am I looking at? Caravaggio painted this in 1609. Beatrice explained, her voice vibrating with excitement. "He extensively used a pigment known as lead tin yellow type 1. But if you look at the micro fissures in the paint under the UV spectrum, the crystalline structure of the binder is completely wrong. It's too uniform. Furthermore, look at the underlying sketch marks visible through the thin glaze here. Caravaggio was famous for never using preliminary sketches. He incised outlines directly into the wet primer with the handle of his brush. These are faint graphite marks. Graphite wasn't widely used for underdrawings until the late 18th century. She turned around her face, practically glowing, looking up into Victor's astonished eyes. "Victor," she said, triumphantly. "This painting is a forgery. It's a very good one, likely painted in the 1920s, but it's completely fake. It's worth maybe $20,000 as a decorative piece, not $60 million. Victor stared at her, his brilliant mind instantly calculating the devastating implications of this revelation. The tension in his shoulders completely vanished, replaced by a low, dangerous chuckle that rumbled deep in his chest. Harrington leveraged a worthless forgery to secure $40 million in loans. Victor said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "Which means he committed massive multinational bank fraud." "Exactly," Beatrice said. "And more importantly, Victor interrupted, his eyes gleaming with lethal joy. He just promised a $60 million masterpiece to the Russo syndicate to pay for my assassination. If the Russos find out Harrington lied to them, that he offered them a worthless piece of junk to fight a war, the Russos will kill him themselves," Beatrice finished, "and they will call off the attack on your ports." Victor didn't waste a second. He pulled out his phone, dialing his underboss. "Arthur, call the Russo family consigliere. Tell them I am sending over a high-resolution, certified appraisal dossier immediately. Let them know Harrington is trying to pay them with a 1920s forgery. Once they realize they're being played, stand down, our men. The Russos will handle Harrington for us." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the desk. The threat of a massive mob war had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes, not by bullets, but by the brilliant mind of the fat, beautiful woman standing in front of him. Victor stepped toward her, the space between them evaporating. He reached out his large hands, gripping her thick hips with a possessiveness that made Beatrice's breath catch. He pulled her flush against him, savoring the feeling of her soft, generous curves, molding perfectly against his hard, muscular frame. "You just saved my empire, millions of dollars, and potentially dozens of lives," Victor whispered, his face inches from hers. He looked deeply into her eyes, stripping away the last remnants of her insecurities. "They called you names tonight. They tried to make you feel small. But look at you, Beatrice. Look at the power you hold." Beatrice looked up at him, feeling a surge of absolute confidence she had never known. She reached up her soft hands, threading through his dark, slicked-back hair. "I am not small, Victor," she whispered back. "I never have been." "No." Victor agreed, capturing her lips in a bruising, passionate kiss that tasted of aged whiskey and absolute devotion. He groaned his hands, exploring the heavy, beautiful curves of her body, completely addicted to her. "You are my queen, and tomorrow the whole city will know it." Down in the vault, surrounded by millions of dollars in stolen art and lethal secrets, Beatrice finally found the one place where she didn't just fit. She reigned supreme. Thank you so much for watching this intense, suspenseful romance story. If Beatrice's brilliant revenge and Victor's absolute devotion kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a powerful, confident heroine and a fierce, protective mafia boss. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our thrilling daily audio dramas. See you in the next one.